Hey, welcome to MNFT Freedom episode number 8. So up until this point, we've had a lot of great discussions about the mindset, about, getting your budget started, about, a little bit about credit interest. But tonight is a special episode because we have a special guest joining us tonight. I want to welcome Matthew to the platform. Hey, Matthew, how you doing this evening?
So good, Scott. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So Matthew is a financial advisor, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Correct. It's technically considered a investment advisor representative, but that's just a namesake.
Formalities.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So, the cool thing about this is, Matthew talked with me yesterday and we were talking about what should we bring to the table. And because we did a budget and, we talked a little bit about credit interest and how you can get kind of stuck in that quicksand. Matthew thought it'd be a great idea to start tonight to come on tonight and talk about FICO scores and what that means for you and how to improve them, how to keep your score up, all that good stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to talk about this because this is such I think, just a kind of mystical thing, right? The FICO score. People, think that, I'll improve my score if I pay this off and it'll happen immediately, but it doesn't, right? So
Right.
there's different things that go into account of that. And, Matthew, I'll just kind of convert to you and see what you have to say about it.
Sure. And I want to just be cognizant that we want this to be a dialogue too. So if anybody has any questions or would like to learn more information or go a little bit deeper into a particular subject or topic, we can certainly do that. Again, my name's Matthew Snyder. I'm based in Durham, North Carolina. A little bit about me just before we get into things, but I have a background in economics. It's my undergraduate degree. I have an MBA in finance. And as Scott mentioned, I'm a registered investment advisor. And what that means is that I took a test called the Series 65. But what it really means is that I have fiduciary responsibilities to you and to the people that I engage with. And what that means is that I have to put your interests first. And everything we talk about certainly isn't a notion to go invest and do some things, but you should just know that I am licensed and have experience in this space. And I love talking about money and I love educating people about money. And my hope is that when we look through some of these aspects of your credit score, some of these like really bizarre concepts, that we can actually find a light at the end of the tunnel and find ways that we can capitalize on some of the rules and regulations that are in play for us. So with that, I'll kind of just start in talking a little bit about what these score components are, right? Like a few years ago, the top 3 credit reporting agencies were fined over $26 million for actively deceiving customers by misstating the cost and the usefulness of products like their personal credit scores. There's kind of this weird mentality in the United States where we have 3 different agencies report on these. And that makes it really difficult for us to really understand really how they work and whose rules are the right ones and how do we understand how those work. In the United States, at least, and Scott, please feel free to interrupt me if you think there's a question that you have or that anybody might have. But
No, I'm going to let you go on with in the United States, and then I'm going to add a little bit to the three credit bureaus. So
okay, yeah, fantastic. So in the United States, they have credit scores which are comprised of these 3-digit numbers, and they're really intended to just predict the likelihood of a borrower's failure to meet their credit obligations. And it's just an algorithm that speaks to a total history of how things get done in your financial plan. And it aggregates all the payments and all the different mechanisms that you use to engage in the financial economy. And these scores go up and down, based on the history of a borrower, the amount of capital they have, and a number of other factors. And one thing that, I'm a fan of Warren Buffett myself, and he says one thing about reputations that are just like credit scores, which are they take years to build and minutes to ruin. And with that, Scott, I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you touched on the 3 bureaus. Different bureaus are used for different types of credit, right? So I know predominantly for auto loans, right? The bureau that's pulled for that is TransUnion. Uh,
Hmm.
credit cards, I believe it's Experian, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong because I'm by no means a professional here. But what you were also referring to is how is that score accumulated? How
Hmm.
do they come up with a number and put that on your ability to repay a loan, which is what that number is? It is your ability to take a loan, whatever it may be, whether it's a credit card, a car payment, a mortgage, whatever, and your ability to pay back that score, which ranges from 300 to 850,
Hmm.
is your pretty much your report card with the creditors of how well you can repay that loan. And there's a lot of things that go into account there. And what you were saying earlier, and I popped this up on the screen,
Hmm.
is this is kind of how your FICO score is accumulated. And I found this on several different websites. And it's essentially the breakdown that 35% of your score is made up of your payment history, 30% the amount owed, your balance, right, or debt to income. 10% is new credit accounts. Are you applying for new credit? 15% length of credit history, and 10% is the mix of the types of credit that you have. So these are what comes up with this overall score that you may have here, anywhere from 300 to 850. And this chart has 360 as the beginning point. And I've, seen scores personally in every range here. And the crazy thing is, if you're down in this range, in this green area, it makes it almost more difficult to get out of it because you're faced with higher interest rates. You're faced with, the less likelihood of you being able to obtain a loan or a
Hmm.
line of credit or an auto loan, whatever it may be, or even a mortgage, right? I think
Hmm.
minimum credit score to obtain a mortgage is 620. Is that correct?
It really depends on the state and it depends
Mhm.
on where they're pulling it from. I think that's the other thing that makes this so tricky is you have three different agencies all computing one score differently. So you can have three different scores and based on, like you said, the organization or the institution that's pulling that score, you're going to get something different. So like my Bank of America one uses Experian and my Chase one uses TransUnion. Like,
Yep.
and they're always different, but I'm always like, one's ahead of the other just a little bit. I'm always trying to like, can I get one where they're even? Would be
Right.
just amazing.
Well, and that's because they pull from different things and
Right.
they take different things into account. The three bureaus are TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. And if you didn't know this, everyone is entitled to a free credit bureau pool once a year.
Hmm.
So you can go on these websites, you can register, and it is totally free to obtain your credit bureau, your credit history
Hmm.
from each one of these sites. Now, what is that going to do for you? That's going to do a couple of things. It's going to tell you what is affecting your credit first.
Hmm.
Is there stuff on there that is from 10 years ago that just for some reason is lingering, even though it's been satisfied, right? And it's causing a negative impact on your credit bureau. Is it, that you had a late payment last month, you called the credit card company and you said, hey, I know it's late, I'm going to get it to you, and they're reassuring you that the payment will not be reported as late. Well,
Hmm.
you can double check that and see if they reported it as late. And if they did tell you that they would not report it, you can, you know, uh, argue it, and you can call them back and have them remove that mark.
Hmm.
There's a lot of things that you can do there to help improve your score. One of the things that I like about all of these is I think Experian is the only one that charges, but they all offer a credit freeze.
Hmm.
And I am a big advocate of that. I love being able to lock my credit up to know that no matter what, nobody's opening up a line of credit in my name,
Hmm.
and stealing my identity, and I'm
Right.
gonna get a bill for $10,000 one day and say, well, what's this for, right?
Yeah.
And then my wife and I are gonna have a conversation about it and find out that it wasn't her, you know.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that those are the three bureaus I pull from. They all pull a little bit differently. One thing that I well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to stop there and go back to you, Matthew, because I don't want to take off and run with this too much, because I can go on a tangent here.
No problem. No problem. I think, just for people to help get a sense of either examples or a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these pieces. I think it'd be good just to talk a little bit about those, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So payment history, for example, this is the biggest and the most important one to worry about. This is the equivalent of, do you repay your loans on time? And so it's based on the presence or lack of cracks in your credit armor, so to speak. Bill payments that are made consistently and on time, they're going to help you build a score that's better. And just like I said, it weights it more. So the more payments that you make over time, the better. If you have charge-offs, missed bill payments, bankruptcies, those things are going to impact your scores. One thing to remember, especially if you do get a late payment, it's if you have it due on the 14th, say for example, you may think that that's a missed payment on the 14th, but in fact, you have 30 days up until when the payment is due to make that payment before many places will report it to the bureau. So I wouldn't advocate not paying the bills, but just understand that there is a little bit of time when you have missed a payment before that gets reported to the bureau. So make sure we get that taken care of. But that's just something to
Yeah.
know.
Trust me,
Um,
American Express isn't going to take, Matthew said, that's not a good enough excuse. You pay your bills.
Not yet, not yet. Um, when we talk about the amounts owed, this one is really interesting because it talks all about credit utilization, right? So that's the ratio of what you owe to how much you can borrow. And that's really important because if I can borrow $10, but you'll only lend me $20, that's a difference than me saying, well, I can borrow $10 and you're going to lend me $100. Like that could be, the amount you're willing to trust with me is a direct reflection of your overall credit score. So if in an ideal world, if you had a credit limit of $10,000, you wouldn't try to overuse that credit card more than 20 or 30%. That means like $2,000 or $3,000 a month before paying it off again. So they want to see fairly low credit utilization. One way to bump that up is to sometimes ask your credit card, for example, if you can get a raise in your credit limit. So if I am typically borrowing $1,000 on a $10,000 limit, that's roughly 10%. I call them up and I say, hey, I've been doing this for a few years and I've been paying all my bills. Can you raise it a little bit, or is there a promotion? And they'll say, yeah, we raise it to $15,000 or maybe $20,000. And I keep doing that $1,000 payment. And now my utilization is 7% or 5%. It's even less because I now have access to that much more money. So that's a really important feature as well. So think about that when you're looking at some of the credit utilization pieces.
Yep, absolutely. And we talked a little bit about that last week with the credit card debt calculator I had
Mm-hmm.
created, is credit utilization, and how, if you get to that point where you can get rewards for using a credit card, you can
Mm-hmm.
actually earn money from that, but you
Yeah.
have to have a good score to do that, because they're not going to give that 550 credit score a card that's going to give you a 2% back cash back on everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
they're
Mm-hmm.
they're going to charge you to use that credit.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have an annual fee. But once you build up that credit and you get to that point, taking that $2,000 a month or $1,000 a month that you're putting on that card and paying it off in full is essentially giving you 20 extra dollars that
Mm-hmm.
month, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a benefit.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So one thing here that I love talking about with respect to length of credit history is an example that I personally employ, which is, we want to make sure that we have the longest possible time that we can have with either one particular credit account. So that means a credit card. So if you're going to have to close a credit card account, you want to make sure you're going to close the ones that have the shortest history. Unfortunately, I have some credit card I had when I was like 18 years old through Bank of America that I never want to put anything on, but I put like my Netflix on it once a month. And that way it just keeps the payments going, and that keeps that length of time really really long. You can also, oh, go ahead.
I just want to touch on that. So in my experience, I've come to the finding that you never really want to cancel a credit card,
Yep.
because that does negatively affect your bureau balance, right? Or your bureau.
Temporarily.
Right.
Temporarily, yeah.
So, one thing that is probably a better alternative is, if you don't want that credit card anymore, you just don't use it, right?
Mm-hmm.
After a certain amount of time. And it's in that fine print when you signed, or signed up for it. It tells you that, if it's not used within a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month window, that it will automatically be canceled. If they do that, it doesn't affect you in the same way as if you call them and say, yeah, I just want to cancel this card.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that didn't affect your score, because, well, and the other thing I would say to that is, sometimes if you don't make the payment, the bureau doesn't consider that payment in the history because no payment was made. So if
Right.
you have 6 months of non-payment because the balance is $0, it doesn't really help you. So like in that instance, if you're able to get rid of cards because you don't use them and they just kind of cancel them and they go away, then that's a really powerful way to get rid of credit cards, because sometimes they just hang around forever.
Yep. Yeah. And I have personal experience with that. So, years ago, we had paid off all of our credit cards and, canceled them. This was back
Mm-hmm.
during the 2008, housing crisis. Well, it would have been
Sure.
2009. And any case, I didn't realize that by doing that, what happened was it was dropping my credit score. And
Mm,
then we had our mortgage through GMAC, and
sure.
GMAC went under in 2011. And with them going under, they sold our mortgage to a non-mortgage company that didn't report to the credit bureau. So
Interesting.
literally, credit wise, looked like I fell off the face of the earth, me and my wife. So our credit score paused at this lower level, and you know didn't improve. And I'm like,
Mm,
well, when I did actually want to utilize my credit, and I forget what it was that we were looking to do, and realized that, hey, it's not possible. I was like,
right.
whoa, well, how's that?
Wow.
I mean, I satisfied all the debt. We canceled them, and
Mm-hmm.
then our mortgage was sold because the mortgage company we were with went under. And now, because it all this kind of happened in a series of a short period of time,
Mm-hmm.
it dropped my score to a point. And yeah, I was kind of like stuck there. I had to dig myself out. So I know those, like, annual fee credit cards, and, they're great to get you back in the game, but they're
Mm-hmm.
definitely not what you want to stick with.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
One other really like important trick for folks, and this goes to with your mortgage, as well as any particular liens or loans that you have, including a credit card payment. But if you can make the installments twice a month, not only is it really good for your credit, but it also shrinks the time it takes for you to repay your loan.
Yep.
And that's a really important thing that we like to try to share with folks. And if you think about it, it's pretty logical. If you make one payment a month, that's 12 payments a year. But if you make one payment a week, that's what will be ended up being 12. I guess I did the math wrong, but it's essentially 2 extra payments that you end up making
Yep.
into the year. And over a 30-year loan, it makes a ton of difference.
Right. Yep. So you'll actually have 26 payments instead of just 20.
26. That's right.
Yeah, instead of 12. Right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. No, and that's all good advice. So
Mhm.
let's go back, and let's say somebody gets themselves into this area here, this 360 to 580.
Mhm.
Um, what are some good tips to help them kind of get out of that and bump their credit up?
It's a great question, and you're right. It can be really challenging because if you're in a system where they won't issue you credit because of bad credit, how are you supposed to get better credit, right? So it's very counterintuitive. So I had a family member go through a bankruptcy in 2008, in that same sort of financial crisis time. and their credit was pretty much shot for, I think it was at least 10 years, that it was kind of like very tough for them to get a loan. And it was just very problematic. And over the course of time, it became really important for them to get a relationship with a bank. And it sounds kind of interesting because we do so much online banking, but if you can work with somebody at a bank and get them to know you, there's ways and programs they have now for people to make micro improvements to their credit. And they have like a compounding effect too. So of course, the more things you do, the more credit you'll get to take on, et cetera. And it'll help snowball that credit score higher and higher. One big thing that people can do is consolidate multiple lines of credit into a single personal loan. And so those organizations I've used for my student loans for a number of years have used Earnest, which is it's a great personal and student loan organization, and they allow you to make 2 payments a month automatically, which I've always really, really enjoyed. But you can take some of these credit card lines that you have or mortgage payments or whatever, and you can many times bring them together in a single line of credit. And a lot of times that'll lower your payment. And if you lower that payment to something that's more manageable, and then you start making those payments over time, that one loan can help you start to build back that credit. So that's like one really good example.
Yeah. And one thing you never want to do is default on a student loan, because those are federal loans. That's Uncle Sam you're defaulting on. And that hurts you severely.
You also can't get them discharged in a bankruptcy, which is pretty problematic. So I can't, we would have had a whole wash of students saying like, well, I'm just bankrupt. I owe, for my law degree, I owe $250,000. I'm just not going to do it. I'll go bankrupt. But because there's no physical asset or any way for them to price or get back the collateral, student loans are not dischargeable in bankruptcy, which is very problematic in many cases.
Wow. So yeah, that's all good information for the younger people out there that are, thinking about that first credit card while they're in college and not really making any money,
right.
Or just thinking about their credit. But yeah, the other thing that I was told, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I was trying to dig out of that lower area that I was in, after that 2008 ordeal, I was doing exactly that. I got a credit card that had a annual fee, because that's the only credit card I could get. The balance was low, and I was using it and paying it off every month, paying it off every month. And my score wasn't changing. And I was talking to somebody. It was a financial advisor of sorts. I forget exactly what field they were in. And they said, try leaving 10% balance on the card rollover right every month, so that it shows that you have a credit card, that you're utilizing that credit card, that you're making payments on that credit card, and that it is being utilized responsibly, right?
So, right, like you're actually using that $10 of free money, and they're going to charge you 20% interest, so it's going to be like 20 cents,
right?
Right. So it's marginal, but you still have that check mark on the payment type, I guess, that you made. You didn't pay it down to zero every day, every month, but you left a little bit in there.
That's right.
Just to make it a loan.
Yep. Right? And by doing that, and it was weird because I think we went 6 months where I was just paying it off and my score didn't change at all. 3 months after doing that, my score started going up.
Really?
So it was kind of weird that I that worked, right? That they want you to have a balance rolling over. Essentially, again, charging you more to get that credit up higher, right? On top of the whatever the interest rate was, the 20%, whatever the credit card interest rate was, and then having that annual fee on top of that, and then having to roll a balance every month in order to get your score to improve. And but it worked. I mean, I got myself out of that situation and back to where I was prior to all of that, to canceling all those cards. And and just as an FYI, it was a lot of credit cards, because it was, every time you went into a store, it's like, oh, if you sign up today, you get an X amount, of a discount. And, if you use your card, you get another discount. So I'm like, oh, sure, sign me up. And, I use it, pay it off, and then not use it again. Right. And, or only use it occasionally. So like I had all these credit cards, but I didn't have a balance on them. And by canceling those, it really affected me in a bad way. But, the great thing about having good credit, though, is when you're in this range here, this orange and red range, the 700 to 850 range, that's where things get super cheap. You get better rates on mortgages, you get better rates on auto loans, you get, interest-free financing, right? Those are things that aren't available to this lower area here, the poor credit side of things. And it's crazy, because you'd think, that these people here that are in this area, they need it more, right? They need that break more than the people that are up here. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So you have to maintain a higher score to get those benefits.
And I want to kind of go back to one thing you were talking about, which is if it were all based on the amount of money that you used during building your credit, people who are very, very wealthy would have the highest credit scores, but that's not the way that it goes. So to your point, as long as you're making the small check boxes like filled in every time you make that payment or every time you keep that card open or act responsibly, you're going to get rewarded. And it's not in a lopsided way, because your score can increase pretty well and substantially if you've added a couple snowball effects over the course of a year or maybe 18 months. It's not going to happen overnight, but there's a lot to say about that. Like even the littlest bit, opening that card, making those payments, it doesn't have to be $100,000 for you to get to a specific spot. It can be $10, $100.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
Yep.
So let's say you've gotten yourself to this area here, the middle of the road, and you need to go get yourself, let's say, a car, right? Yeah, I hear a lot of horror stories about people that go into dealerships and their credit just gets pummeled. All right. You can actually request that, hey, I want you to only send me to X amount of banks, right? 2 banks, 3 banks, whatever. That's it. No more. Because a lot of places will just slingshot you to every bank that they deal with. And every time they do that, that affects your credit score as well. And it drops it. Right. And then if you don't end up getting something there and you go to another dealership, they're going to do the same thing. And the next thing you know, this 640 score or 650 is now into this range, and your rates are going up.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to give you, there's a little bit of a tweak there.
Okay.
So a particular, you're right in the sense that if you go from dealer to dealer to dealer, like, I want to go drive a Honda, I want to go drive a Toyota, and I want to go drive a Jeep. Every time you do what they call a hard pull on your credit, that's going to lower your score a little bit. Hard pulls, you don't want to have a lot of hard pulls. What that means is that they go to a system and they say, this person wants a loan, and they're going to look and do it like a hard stamp on your credit and take a look at it. And when you go to a dealership, they'll, and I know this because I used to sell cars, not very well, but if you ever want to know anything about buying a car, leasing or loans, you can ask me that as well. And I'll give us another example in just a moment about how to raise scores. But what they do is they open up this account and they say, okay, if you have a Mazda, for example, you're going to get financed through JP Morgan Chase. That's just their initial bank lender of record. And so they'll pull it up and they'll say, okay, Matthew Snyder, here's his information, here's the credit application. And then JP Morgan will say yes or no to that loan based on the credit score that they pull. Could be through TransUnion, could be through Experience. They use all different ones. And then if they say no, you'll get another option from like other banks that say, oh, we'll give them at this rate or at this rate. But those themselves are not particularly different hard pulls. So you can go to a dealership and look into a car and they'll do one pull, but once they do that one pull, they have the full access to a number of banks in their discretion. It's when you go from dealer to dealer, that's when it's going to start lowering your score.
There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So we've kind of established, if you're trying to rebuild your credit, how to do that. What if you're in this upper
In the
range
middle.
or in the middle,
Yeah.
right? How do you prevent yourself from going down? What are some things that you can do to make sure that you're not negatively affecting yourself? I mean, of course, you want to
Yeah.
make your payments, but even making your payments, you could still see your score go down.
Right.
And yeah, I know a few of those reasons, but Matthew, I'll let you share,
Sure.
what that means, or why that would happen.
Yeah. I mean, the things that are going to make your score go down, or you got to make sure you're paying your bills on time and
Yep.
consistently. Keep your credit utilization under 30%. So if you have a $10,000 limit on a credit card, don't be using more than $3,000 a month on that card. And of course, pay it off. Only apply for credit when you really need to, and not too frequently. This is the same thing. If you go to a dealership and you want to buy a car and they do a hard pull on your credit and it dings your credit, you shouldn't expect to go in a month or two to try to go get a mortgage on a new house,
Yep.
because they're going to see a little bit of a dip in credit and they're going to maybe give you a worse rate, and they're also going to do a hard pull. So if you decide you don't want the house, now you've had two hard pulls in 2 months. It's typically not the way you want to do it. So try to minimize any times you want to open and apply for new lines of credit. That includes new credit cards.
Yep.
And then don't, I'm of the opinion that you shouldn't close accounts. You should always just keep them open and make little bits of payments. I do believe in some instances, in some banks, you can transfer a credit card and put it in the name of a dependent or a child. So like if you, for example, had a teenager and you wanted to teach them about credit, you could take a card that you've had open for a number of years. I believe, I'd have to double check, but I feel like I've had a use case where somebody was able to transfer it and be able to pass that credit building along to somebody who's a child as well. So that's always one interesting way to do it. And then just use a variety of credit. That's like a big thing too, is credit cards, student loans, mortgages, all those kinds of, the bureaus want to see a cornucopia of credit. They
Mhm.
don't want to just see car loans. They want to see that you can manage all your finances in different ways.
Absolutely. And they don't want to just see a store credit line, right? They want to
Right.
see a good mix,
Hmm.
So, uh, yeah, I was told, auto loan, mortgage, and credit card. I mean, those are
Hmm.
like the three key, things that you want to have on your credit to establish it.
Sure.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe the Bureau pulls and shows or reflects
Hmm.
2 years at a time. So
Yeah.
if you want to actually establish credit, you don't want to go out and if you have no credit, take out a loan
Hmm.
or buy a car or buy anything for that matter and take it out for a 5 year period, but pay it off in, 6 months because
Hmm.
that's not going to benefit you. You want to actually take it out at least 2 years to show that you have that range of, good status. Is that correct?
That's definitely like a good lead time. That actually brings me to like another use case of how people can build credit faster than what we might typically think from like a purchase perspective.
Hmm.
And that's the lease versus buy argument when it comes to buying a car. And it's something that we do pretty often. Like we buy houses every so often, but people buy cars pretty often. And in many cases, people think that if I finance the car, I'm going to get issued a line of credit. I'm going to pay that off, and it's going to be good for my credit over the long term. And I own the asset, which is true, and that's important. So if the bank wants to come assess your value, they'll use that as an asset, which is always a benefit. But the challenge is that when you finance a car, the typical payoff, it's grown since I was in the business, but it was usually like 5 or 6 years. But now you can get loans out almost like 8 or 9 years, which is
10
a
years.
little, oh my gosh, that is so
You can
dicey.
go, there's banks that are doing 10 years. And
Yikes.
yeah,
Uh,
scary, right?
well, so if you did that, so my point will get even exacerbated, or I guess it'll be better for you, my argument here in a minute, because if you have one loan that you take and it's 6 years, the typical lease, for example, is every 2 years. So what most people don't know is when you finish a lease, you actually get the same benefit as a paid auto. So that paid auto is when you've financed a car and you paid it all the way down to zero. And so that would happen once in a 6 year period normally. Whereas if you leased every 2 years, you could have three opportunities to raise your score over the same time. And if you had a 10-year loan, you could do it 5 times. So
Mhm.
sometimes when people take finance into consideration, they think they're doing it to build their credit, which is great. You still have a length of time, 10 years of credit, but you're only getting marked once for it because it's been one line of credit. But
Right.
if you lease a car, you kind of get this interesting benefit of a smaller time frame and a paid auto on that
Yep.
score.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think on a lease, it also benefits you for your debt to income because it doesn't
Yeah.
show the overall balance of the auto loan, like the auto
Hmm.
loan would of 20,000 or 30,000 or whatever that amount might be, but it's showing that your outstanding balance is your payment. And then once it's satisfied
Correct.
every month, then it shows another one. So you're
Hmm.
satisfying that loan every month essentially, and then when you satisfy the lease, it benefits you on another level too.
Right.
So
Right.
that's another good thing. And I will admit, I was always a purchaser, and 3 years ago, 2 years ago, we did our first lease, and I'm like, you know what, this makes more sense, right? It does. And it does. It affects your credit in a good way, more so than an auto loan would.
Hmm.
So, at least that's been my experience. So,
Yep.
all right. So moving on. Let's say, uh, or I don't know. I mean, do you want to talk about anything that we haven't really touched on that maybe you wanted to chat about? I know we kind of went on a
Yeah. No, I think
right here.
this is a lot of what I kind of envision talking about. If there's questions or anything else you think would be like a hot topic, I'm certainly happy to dive into it.
Yeah. So I guess one thing is the American dream, right?
Hmm.
Is to have a house, own a home,
Hmm.
right? Not necessarily, the ideal thing. A lot of people look at owning a home as an investment where it's actually, a overall
An
cost.
expense. Yeah.
Right. It's an expense.
Right.
But they look at it as, an investor would look at it initially, where it's like, oh, if I buy a house, and stay in it for X amount of years, and, I'll be able to sell it and make more money. Well, yeah, but are you taking into account all the money that you're putting into that house? Because, if you're renting, the landlord takes care of all
Hmm.
that, right?
Hmm.
If you're buying, well, if you need a new roof, that's on you. If your water heater goes out, that's on you. So all those expenses get tied in there, and it's actually a financial burden
Hmm.
while you're there. So, but let's say that's someone's dream, right? They
Hmm.
they are done with college. They're satisfying their student loans, and maybe have a credit card. What is their next steps if that's their goal, is to buy a condo or a home?
It's a great question, and I think you're totally right. It is absolutely an expense. It may seem like just the monthly payment, but the amount of capital that goes into preserving the house, keeping it functioning, and pumping full of food and all this kind of stuff is definitely a lot. Upkeep and all those things. So there's definitely a cost benefit analysis that people have to do when looking at it. I think in America right now, the biggest barrier to entry is the down payment, right?
Yep.
And part of your credit score is going to stipulate how much a down payment is required. When my wife and I were looking at buying a house in Durham, we were finding, I think some of the banks with like the highest credit scores, you could get a down payment as low as like 3 or 5% on a home,
Yep.
which is like astonishing because they think, okay, you're not a flight risk, and we believe in the property and stuff. Okay, fine, but that's a very low commitment from the buyer to come into a home, and that means that you're financing 85 or 90% of the home, which is also a lot.
Yep.
So I think that younger people need to feel or need to build a cash reserve, right, to be able to do these things like put a down payment up for a house that is closer to the 15 to 20% range. That's really should be your target goal, and then the one thing to be considering too now is like the interest rates are really high. So
Yep.
interest rates themselves will price people out of markets they wouldn't normally be priced out of because they're 2 and 2.5 times as high as they were 2.5 years ago.
Mhm.
So making sure to build a cash reserve is really, really important. And one challenge about that we don't really talk about is inflation is it's 6 or 7%.
Yep.
So how am I as a young person supposed to put capital away under my mattress and lose 7% every year and then have enough money for a down payment on a house in 3, 4, or 5 years, right?
Yep.
That can be like a really big challenge. And so there are strategies like certificate of deposit laddering, where you can find 1 to 2 to 3% interest certificate of deposits and kind of ladder them over time, so you're stacking a little bit of interest there to beat inflation. And there's some index funds and things like that are going to be doing 3, 4, 5%, and that's pretty conservative, and that's okay. But it's a big challenge. So keeping cash on hand is definitely something that's really important. Also for the other things that come with buying a house, right? So you really want to be in a position where you're never really concerned about what that payment's going to look like. And if you had to come out of pocket 20 or 25% more than your mortgage on a monthly basis just to keep up with the house. And I think too, the metric is what, a third, maybe even less than that, 20 to 25% of your overall income as a household should be going toward your mortgage.
Yeah, here, I actually had
Yeah,
that
maybe.
figured out. Here's my
Okay,
budget
good.
planner. So yeah, they say for your residence, which would mean real estate tax, school tax, insurance, maintenance, that should not exceed or that should not exceed 30%. Ideally, you want to be at 20%.
Yeah.
And this was taken off of several, and this was 2 weeks ago. We went over this, and I shared where all these numbers came from.
Mm.
But yeah, so the other thing I want to add to that is, yes, there are programs, there are federal programs that allow you to buy a house with 3% down. But what you are not aware of is there's a thing that they call PTI, which if you're not putting at least 20% of the value of the home down, then you're paying additional for, it's essentially mortgage insurance.
Yep.
So you're giving more money away, right? So
Yep.
taking a little bit longer and saving up to get to that 20% is a better move and a better plan than just jumping in at the 3% and having that mortgage interest or mortgage insurance, I guess they call it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the PMI is awful. It's like
RPM.
it's its own like scam, right? It's an
Yep.
insurance for you that that you're going to be liquid in the house. I don't agree with it, but I know it's a financial instrument that banks and money making institutions love.
Yep.
However, if you're at say 18%, a 2% of the PMI, it's maybe 40, $50 an extra a month. And if that's going to get you into your dream home, by the time, once you get to that 20%, you just call them up and say, hey, I got 20% equity in the house now. Or you wait a year or two and get it reappraised. So if it appraises for a higher value, and you've got more equity in the house, they'll take the PMI off. So in some instances, it's just a tiny little tax. But if you're at like 3 or 4 or 5%, you're paying 15% on top of, PMI on top of the other part of equity that you don't have. Is just like a mess.
Yeah. And it can get ugly and make things even tougher. So, and that's part of why we went over this whole budget, is because the first few weeks we talked about where you should start and what you need to do. And that's why we created this.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
this even touches on the debt to income ratio based off of what this pulls from and what your numbers look like. It'll show you your ability to get a loan or get a line of credit based on your debt to income. And as your, debts increase,
Oh, that's fantastic.
it actually reduces the
Very
remaining
cool.
amount of income. So,
Nice.
yeah, so I mean, this is something that we did 2 weeks ago, and we offered to anybody that wanted it just to reach out.
Very cool.
And I'll give you instructions on how to duplicate this and save it on your own platform, because here I can share it, but if you put your numbers in here, the next person that opens it up is going to see your financials, right? Some people don't want people to see their financials. So
Totally.
it's very easy to just, copy it and paste it into a new format. And I can give people instructions. And the
That's
same
fantastic.
and the same with the credit card interest calculator. This is what we talked about last week, which is why, talking about the FICO score this week is so awesome, because this shows that, if you have a balance of $2,000, it's going to tell you what, essentially the payment could look like. And then let's see here. Oh, I have we were talking about rewards as well. And, if you paid off in full and the amount of extra. So if you take all that out, the minimum payment on $2,000 based on a 2% is $40 a month. And if you make $40 a month payments, the amount of interest you're paying every month is 35% at 21% or $35. And it'll take you 119 months to pay it off. So roughly 10 years. Where if just adding a little extra to your payment, even as little as $15, that cuts that down to less than half of that time.
Yeah.
So
one thing that just struck me as I'm reminded of this too is this is important with interest on a credit card and interest on mortgages, and pretty much I think even student loans. But if you call and you make an additional payment, you want to make sure you specify that payment goes to the principal and not the interest. So what's the worst? I mean, like it makes sense, but like the backwards thing about how they amortize the schedule for your home or your mortgage is that you pay all the interest or most of the interest first. The bank gets paid first before you take your little piece of equity of your home. So you think you're making a $2,000 payment to your home, but you're actually making an $1,800 payment to go pay the bank, and you're making a $200 or $200 payment on your home. So now you say, okay, I want to pay this off faster. Even $50 a month or $100 a month, it would do wonders over a 30-year mortgage. Cuts like I think 7 years off the total bit of a mortgage, and you're not doing anything else. But you want to specify that payment goes to the principal and not the interest. And many times people they'll misclick the button, or they're not sure which one to do. And that will always be your right answer, is the principal and not the interest.
Yep. And mortgage companies and banks, they're in business for money. So they want to get
they're not making it easy.
Right. So if you don't specify, they're either going to apply it towards your payments, so they get their interest, or they're going to take their cut out of it first and put the remaining towards your principal. So you do have to specify anytime that you're paying in addition to the minimum.
In addition.
Yep. Absolutely. Good point. Cool. So we are at about 50 minutes into our show. Anything that you want to just touch on or add in that maybe we missed?
Trying to think. Not off the top of my head. I feel like there was so much about credit scores that we covered. I'm just trying to think of anything that is not striking me as something to be called out.
Yeah. So I will add, definitely go on to transunion.com, Equifax.com, and Experian. Everyone is entitled to a free credit report once a year. So you can pull that at any time. I usually do it right around tax time because, it's just I'm thinking about money at that time, right? Yeah, paying Uncle Sam, just want to take a look and see where I'm at. But that's one thing you want to do. If you do a lot of activities on your computer or your mobile phone or whatnot, like myself, I mean, I pay everything online. I don't remember the last time I wrote a check. I don't know if I could even write a check out anymore. It's been years. But the thing with that is we had a scare a few years back where someone called my wife and they gave her information about herself, including her social security number.
Oh, wow.
How did they get that? And that's how we ended up looking into how to freeze our credit, right?
Yeah.
And it's amazing because by us doing that, the amount of junk mail for, credit offers and whatnot that come in the mail anymore are minimized. Yeah. I mean, it's a quarter or less than what we were getting prior to that. Because I guess having that unlocked, they can do soft pulls that really don't affect your credit that much, but it just gets you all that junk mail that you really don't want, right?
Yeah, and I would say two things. One, if you have a credit card through any major bank, Bank of America, Chase, Capital One, they will likely provide that FICO score for you so that it's in the application. So you can check it pretty regularly. I check mine all the time. It's also really good to be in the habit of checking it, because if you're at a specific score for a while and then it dips, you want to think back about either something you did or the potential of identity theft, that somebody figured out something with your credit, and they are putting charges on it that you're not aware of. And one other thing that also came to mind was the notion of credit unions. So we sometimes talk about institutions that might be more willing to lend people with lower credit scores or in the lower bandwidths. Credit
Mhm.
unions are typically great opportunities for folks. They're local institutions. They typically have higher savings rates too. So there was one in Portland that I always liked that had about 3 or 3.5% in a savings account, which is pretty impressive. Is sad to say, but they don't fade the credit unions. They're typically the ones who lend when people may not have other options.
Yep. And the nice thing about credit unions in my experience is if you stay good with them, right? You make your payments on time and you're in good track with them, they tend to overlook any fluctuations in your credit for the next time,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So they look at your history with them in particular and say, okay, well, they made their car payments, or they paid this loan off, and they were in good standing the entire time, and in fact they even paid extra. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to pay as much attention to the fact that their score dropped a little. We're going to go ahead and give them another loan,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, credit unions are definitely fantastic, absolutely. um, but yeah, I mean, definitely check those out. Like Matthew said, a lot of the credit cards offer free credit scores, and they
Mm-hmm.
track where you're at. Um, the bureaus are free to freeze your credit, all except for Experian. I think this is the only one that charges to put a lock or a freeze on your credit.
It may sound very obvious, but remind yourself that you did this, because I did it once when there was the Equifax breach of like Target like a couple years ago,
Hmm.
and I was like, oh, I gotta freeze all my credit. I gotta go all three of them. And then like a year and a half went by, and we went to go get a car or something, and I was like, oh, like they're like, yeah, it's all locked, and I'm like, oh. And then you go try to find the documents, and you don't know where the documents are, and then you got to call them. The terrible customer service. In any case, just write that stuff down.
Yep.
Don't forget.
And yeah, just like in Web3 for your wallets, put it in
Right.
there, put it where you have your passphrases and whatnot.
Yeah.
And keep it safe, and have it in a few different locations. But I am also guilty of that, by the way. I didn't realize it. I just, it was, geez, it was back in the fall. We were out and we were going to make a major purchase, and I'm like, yeah, you know what, I'll take advantage of that rate, and I filled out the credit thing, and it came back to call. And
Mm,
I'm an impatient person. I hate going shopping. So when I'm in a store, the last thing I want to do is spend more time in the store.
mm,
So I'm like, forget it, I will just buy it. So we just paid for
sure.
it. But that was the plan, was to take advantage of it was 0% financing for a period of time. And instead of taking money out of our savings account, which is
Sure.
getting interest, we would be able to put it on 0% interest. And I think it was for 24 months,
Mm-hmm.
and pay it off over a period of a year. And then, keep that money in the bank. Right.
Yeah.
That's, kind of how I looked at it. And that's the difference between having great credit or good credit and having not so good credit. Because, the not so good credit people don't get that 0% offer.
Right.
They get a credit offer, but it's usually in the teens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or higher. So, when you do get to that good or bad, great credit status, then you do get the benefits of, getting things essentially financed for free.
Mm-hmm.
And as
Mm-hmm.
long as you pay them off before the end of that finance term, because
Yep.
that's another, catch there is, even if you have $1 left on the balance and that term ends, they charge you the full interest for the
Mm.
entire purchase for that period of time.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I found that out years ago the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, ouch.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, lots of good stuff, lots of good information we went over tonight.
Yeah, and also like be wary. Like a lot of platforms now, if you're buying things like e-commerce, they'll say like, "Oh, you can just get it for 4 payments of this instead of whatever the price is." And you sign up for them before you know it, you've gone shopping and you've taken out a line of credit that you may forget about, or they may get lost in your spam or something like that. So just be wary. Anytime you're making payments over something over a period of time, there's probably a lien on that that's somehow registered to your score. So just be careful.
Absolutely. All right. Well, so we are just about done here. Matthew, I'm going to let you give us some closing statements, and I will wrap up the show.
Awesome. Well, it's been so great to be here, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with your community. And I hope that we were able to provide some good information. I think one of the reasons I love credit scores so much, it sounds weird to say, is because it's like a game you get to play with yourself, and it's about your financial well-being, right? So these are things that it's going to stay with you for a long time. And it's a good way. It's just like keeping your heart healthy for exercise. It's like keeping your wallet in exercise, right? It's making sure that you're in a good position for being able to take advantage of loaned money, which is how we create generational wealth in this world. If we can't go get a home and we can't pass that home along, or we can't go sell that home and put it into another home, we find it difficult to create ways for our children to grow wealthy without any assistance. And so understanding the dynamics of how your credit works, and thinking of it like, oh, how am I gonna? I'm in the game anyways. I may as well learn how to play it, right? Like it's not like you can't not have a credit score. So I think it's just important for us to learn what it's like, to try to get better at it. And it may seem like a difficult thing, but with a little bit of research and watching these videos over and over, you'll certainly get your answers from us.
Absolutely. And I agree with that so much. Once you get involved, and we talked about this with saving, you start with trying to get that 10% of your income going into some form of investment or savings account to have it work for you. Once you start to see that return, it gets addicting, right? It's like, okay, well, how much more can I get, for not really doing anything? And I love that. I find value in that. And I hope to share that with the community, that they will hopefully find value in it as well. But Matthew, again, I really do want to thank you for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. We do get a lot of views early in the morning. So, I'm hoping that, this show gets just as many views and we get some comments and likes. And, maybe we'll have you back on in the future if you'd be willing.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be looking forward to it for sure.
Absolutely. So thank you again. And my name's Scott, and we do this every Friday night. MNFT Freedom. We talk about everything from Web3 to just the basics, of getting yourself out of debt to, starting your wealth building process, to tonight, learning about FICO scores and, how to, better yourself and get into a better place. So with that, everyone, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next week.
Take care.
Bye-bye.